Welcome to the last day of the Headwater Streams webinar series. We're really happy to have you all with us today. Just want to make sure that I acknowledge the tropical storm. Obviously, this still is impacting a lot of folks, and we're trying to recognize that and get out the recordings to those who request. So again, you can keep on requesting them, and we'll send you links and make sure that you can get copies of this presentation, and we'll get the last presentation, we'll get this presentation to those who might be missing it today. As I said yesterday, if you want to direct all audio or visual issues to Ingrid or myself, if she's the one speaking privately, we'll try to help you out. I am on my phone today, so hopefully my audio issues aren't on the fritz, but if that happens, you know, just let me know. All right, well, and Ingrid had asked you to introduce yourself in the chat, but just another reminder to, you know, one last time, give ourselves your name and who you're representing and what you do. All right, so we're gonna take one last mindfulness exercise before we start this last day. You've made it to day 3 of this training, and so I'd like to welcome everyone to close your eyes, return your thoughts to the intention that you made when you started this webinar series, the questions that you had. Take a deep breath and get ready to enjoy the rest of this webinar. Okay, so we went over quite a bit in yesterday's webinar. We had a lot of making up to do. I won't go into this extensively, but we looked at threats to headwater streams, existing regulatory protections for those streams, identifying streams through mapping and online resources, and addressing headwater stream issues through environmental review. So we covered quite a bit of ground. And hopefully everyone was able to look up stream protections in your community and take a look at the virtual field trip, because we will be discussing those stream protections today in this webinar. Okay, today's agenda, we're going to be looking at local plans. I'm going to talk a little bit about incorporating stream protection into local plans. Local laws and zoning. Ingrid's going to have a discussion on how we can use local laws to get around the gaps in some of the state and federal regulation. Managing headwater streams and naming unnamed streams with Emily Bale, and then we're going to open it up to a conversation about, you know, what's working and what's not through our breakout groups. So we'll have a little bit more of a robust kind of debrief and kind of next steps in that breakout group. Okay, so I'm going to get right to it. I'm going to talk a little bit about small streams and how you can incorporate them into your local planning efforts. This is, you know, the best way in a lot of ways to address small stream protection before a project comes up, by acknowledging it in plans and kind of doing proactive planning rather than reactive sort of protection. So I want to bring your attention to this City of Kingston Open Space Vision Map. I think this is just a really interesting and visually attractive example of a product from an open space plan. And particularly, there's an action that involves 2,500 linear feet of stream corridor to be restored on the Tannery Brook. And again, that didn't come from nowhere. It was a lot of planning to get that specific recommendation in, but being as specific as possible in these plans can really pay dividends in the end. So why are plans important? These are some reasons. I'm sure there are many more, but first of all, they're an opportunity to set priorities and goals. So understanding in a community or even at a hyper-local level for a park or a land trust, just what are the goals and what are the priorities by a land manager or by a community at large. Keeping consistency is also important. We recognize that conservation advisory councils, municipal government in general, land trusts, the entire kind of world of conservation is always in flux, and there's always turnover. And so these plans allow consistency in an inconsistent world. They can help leverage funding. You know, only can help a grant application by being able to cite information from either a comprehensive plan or an open space plan or any type of plan that allows you know, you to be working towards something greater, but also funders recognize this as well. And it can just bring awareness and catalyze action by having these things codified in plans. So we can talk a little bit about that in just a second. So the types of plans I'm going to go over, I'm going to focus pretty heavily on some examples of open space plans, open space inventory as a component of that potentially, and comprehensive plans. But I also want to draw your attention to community preservation plans. This is a specific type of plan that works to direct funding for a specific type of open space protection. I'm not going to get into that, but that's one type of plan. We have watershed planning. This is clearly streams play a huge role in understanding the watershed and water quality that might be addressed in a watershed plan. And at the local level with a property management plan. So knowing where those small streams might be to inform recreational management or the placement of trails on a property. So before we even get into planning and management, the end of this flow chart, I just wanted to talk about the process of conservation planning. You start out identifying what you have, using that information to prioritize, and then having that prioritization and inventory feed into the final plan and management. So it's really a process of moving data to prioritization to planning and action. And so I just do want to go over really briefly identifying what you have or inventorying. And so for all of these examples, I really just wanted to showcase and highlight specific plans, and I'll be including these later in the chat box so that you can link to look at them. They're by no means comprehensive as far as what you can do, but it can give you kind of a flavor for what other communities have done in this case. So I like the Pound Ridge Natural Resources Inventory. It was completed in 2018. And in particular, they actually funded a habitat map that was conducted by Hudsonia, and that looked specifically at small streams on top of a diversity of other habitats in the natural areas of their community. So the great thing about this is any subsequent planning done here, they have this really high quality stream mapping data that can inform not just their natural resources inventory and their planning through the planning board and zoning board, but it also can feed larger open space plans that might potentially come in the future. This inventory is particularly great because Pound Ridge also has an interactive natural resources mapper for their community, and they were able to include those high-resolution map streams into that so that applicants, as well as any citizen, can go in and easily overlay these small streams right onto a map with all the other resources available in their natural resources inventory. So just wanted to highlight that real quick. There are many NRIs, and I'd be happy to talk to whoever, myself and Ingrid, can talk to whoever is interested in pursuing that. The next step is to prioritize, and so that really involves taking it to the next level by mixing data and setting priorities based on that data and community input. So here we have an example of the Cornwall Open Space Inventory. So they had created a natural resources inventory similar to what was done in Pound Ridge, but they also added this step of public input. So they, much like in the comprehensive planning process, if you've been a part of that, they had a public survey that was done. This included in-person events, a couple in-person events, as well as an online survey. So they were able to collect actual data and information on what the community valued, on top of knowing exactly where those resources are with the best available data. And they ended up with a product like this, one of many from that public participation component. And it identified quite a few water-related resources. I didn't get into huge specifics, but it definitely showed that, you know, things like wildlife habitat and aquifer protection rank high. So understanding that small streams contribute to the protection of water quality in some cases, as well as wildlife habitat, is useful in framing and prioritizing which resources to protect. So, and I just want to share this last map. This showed all of the areas that the town identified as priorities for conservation, and it included a short write-up that included the reasons why. In many cases, this included things like wildlife habitat and aquifer protection. But in something like this, you could really get, the more detailed streaming information you have, the better you can show which parcels should be protected to protect those values. And here you can see this is the Moodna corridor, and that showed up time and again resources on water quality. So you'd anticipate that small streams within these areas are contributing to the overall value of these parcels for open space protection. All right, so getting into planning and protection and management, you know, the final process here, I just wanted to start by looking at the comprehensive plan. And this is, you know, a really basic tool that all communities can participate in, or most communities can participate in. And it's really the way that a town can articulate, or a town or village or city can articulate, you know, what's most important to their citizens. And so this document really informs all subsequent decision-making by the community. So it's important that this plan articulates the importance of small streams as well as streams in general. And being specific can be really helpful here. So I'll show you this example of Esopus. This was created and finalized in 2019. And here, this is kind of the overall objective. So these are the larger guiding kind of concepts for this plan. And you can see here that, you know, encouraging smart environmental practices can definitely translate to actions related to small streams. Preserving and maintaining important open space and mitigate an acquisition of resources. That's clearly important for protecting small streams. And just all land use in general and how it protects natural environment. Again, these are great ways to articulate. And it could go further, but this is the highest level of kind of the 10,000-foot view of what Esopus's objectives were here. So, drilling down a little bit more, they have a goal to conserve and promote water resources. And the action that one of the actions they use to achieve this is to designate Black Creek as a wild river. So we're talking about a very specific creek. This isn't what I would consider to be a small stream, but there are many associated small streams that could serve to benefit from that designation. And the fact that it's so specific really makes it something that's easy for people to get behind and design projects around. So being specific in these plans is very important. Here we have protect natural infrastructure. So this includes restoring stream banks, reconnecting streams, and restoring floodplains. Though this is a little bit more general, this really hits at a lot of what we've been talking about, and it doesn't discriminate against things like intermittent streams. You know, it's talking about reconnecting and restoring all streams, and I think that's important in this context. And then I have to keep on moving this box around. Maintaining well-balanced land use. We were talking about that a little bit. Considering stream protection overlay zones. We'll talk a little bit about this later as far as things that communities can do through local zoning, but this kind of, you know, really explicit sort of action is something that makes it more actionable by a community at large. All right, and the last thing I'll talk about is open space planning. So here is an example from the town of Watercourse. You can see they created a plan in 2018 in partnership with the town of Rochester. And in this plan, they had a lot of goals and ways that the community can achieve their open space objectives. But I really want to focus in on this one specific goal, and that was to promote the health of Cedar Swamp, which is this really important wetland complex. It's one of the largest of its kind in the Catskills, if not the largest. And the specific goal here was to designate Cedar Swamp region as a critical environmental area. A critical environmental area is simply a formal designation that's, registered with the DEC. And this designation requires that the planning board really, during the secret process, take a very close look at making sure that the projects that are subject to seeker are accounting for the rationale for why it was designated. So basically, protecting the special elements of that area through the secret process. So it doesn't necessarily protect in the way that, open space acquisition might, permanently protect an area, but it definitely heightens the importance of this area in planning and draws attention to it for a number of reasons. And you can see here, this is kind of the maps that you can get that are created from CEA designation. And you can already tell in looking at this that there are numerous small streams that are all connected to this large wetland complex that are visible here. And now they're all afforded this type of special protection, really because the plan set everything up for the community to take action right from there. And I will also make sure, if Ingrid doesn't do this, I can do this. Our colleague Laura Heedy just created a video that looks at Wawarsing's efforts to create this critical environmental area and just their dedication to planning and climate smart communities. So I encourage all of you to watch that. It's a really easy watch, and you can binge watch with the virtual field trip if you'd like. So that's all I have as a quick overview. I'm not going to take any questions now, but I do want to move the presentation along to Ingrid, and she's going to talk a little bit more about local protections, regulatory protections, that is. All right, Ingrid, take it away.
Thanks, Nate. So welcome back, everyone. I'm glad many of you were able to join us today. So we're going to start, before I begin my presentation, with a poll. So based on your homework, I'm curious to know whether your community has a local law or zoning regulating streams or stream buffer areas. So we'll just take a couple of seconds if you can enter your answer and submit the poll. We'll do that. Looking good so far. This is promising. All right. So, well, I'll stop here. So it looks like, surprisingly, many of you do have some kind of protection, which is good. And a few of your communities do not, and some of you weren't able to figure out, which is okay. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the different types of regulations that that your communities can put in place, and I'll go ahead and share my presentation. Okay. Here we go. And so I'll talk about local laws and zoning for protecting headwater streams. I do want to apologize. I know there are a couple of people participating in this event who were also in the Land Use Leadership Alliance training we held a few months ago, and so this may be a little bit of repetition for you, but hopefully not. It's good to hear things twice sometimes. And also just a disclaimer before I begin that I'm of course not an attorney. I'm not qualified to give legal advice, but I have done my best to try to summarize what I think are some of the key points and kind of distinctions between these different approaches, and we'll be able to point you in the direction for more guidance that you can look into on your own. I thought it'd be helpful to start by going back to the question of which streams are already regulated or protected in some way at the state or federal level. And so as Gretchen discussed yesterday under Environmental Conservation Law, Article 15 in New York, the bed and banks of Class A, B, and C with the trout or trout standard streams are protected, and that leaves intermittent streams mostly unprotected. There are some headwaters that fall under the Protection of Waters program, but many of them do not. And under Section 404 of the U.S. Clean Water Act, traditional navigable waters and their tributaries, including intermittent streams, receive some protection. But of course, there are nationwide permits that still allow some level of disturbance to those streams. But bottom line is that stream buffer areas, which are integral to the integrity of the streams and water quality in them, lack protection unless local governments step in. And many small unmapped headwater streams are still vulnerable. So there are ways that your communities can step in to fill some of those gaps. And these are some of the different approaches that I'll go over. And on the right, there's an image of a cover from a guidance document that I helped some colleagues work on. This is part of a larger set of model local laws to increase resilience that was developed by Department of State and interagency working group. These were published in 2019, and we can also go ahead and provide the link to the full set of local laws in the chat box. I can do that when I'm done with the presentation. So these are the basic approaches that are outlined, and most of the examples I'll mention in my presentation are included in this guidance document with links to the actual code. So I've summarized that guidance and kind of just pulled out the main parts of it related to watercourse protection and included it as a handout in the folder on Box. The key differences in approaches have to do with how streams are defined in the code. So as Gretchen mentioned on day one, there are many different ways that local governments and our state and federal government define and regulate streams. There tend to be these cutoffs in terms of size or the duration of flow, and that can have a big impact on how much stream length is actually protected. In addition, the decision about whether to protect buffer areas and how much of a buffer to protect varies quite widely and has a large impact on how protective those regulations are. In addition, even how you define where that buffer begins or where the edge of the stream is or what you're measuring from, all of those things are important to pay attention to. The laws also vary quite widely in their applicability, which refers to which land uses or other activities are regulated or subject to regulation or are exempt from the law. So I'll go through some examples. These are just examples of some the type of activities that could be exempt under these different laws from what I've seen. Most laws exempt agricultural activities, and there is some limitation to what local governments can regulate when it comes to agriculture because of other state laws. But in addition, some of these laws exempt single-family homes or additions to homes, accessory structures like sheds and swimming pools, driveways or parking areas, landscaping, mowing, fencing, all of these different things. Sometimes they're, are they in, are they out, are they covered? There's quite a bit of ways that our activities on the landscape can impact stream and stream buffer areas, and these laws vary in the degree to which they will regulate them. So I think some key questions to also consider are whether other permits are required for the activity, because if there is an existing permitting process in place that kind of provides a structure and an opportunity to add on the consideration of impacts to the stream or stream buffer area. And similarly, who is going to enforce the law? When you're talking about activities that are not permitted, they're kind of as of right uses in the community, then it's really, it's harder to enforce the compliance with that law just requires, I think, more of a development of awareness among local residents and the creation of a kind of a culture of acceptance for the regulation of activities in those areas. Local watercourse protection laws are the most comprehensive approach to stream protection generally, and these are resource-specific laws. Sometimes, and in many cases, in fact, they apply to both watercourse protection and wetland protection. So communities often approach this issue looking at both streams and wetlands, and design these laws around filling the regulatory gaps in that state and federal framework. So these laws will typically go above and beyond the state laws and the federal laws and deal with streams that are otherwise not protected and the buffer areas that are adjacent to them. So one example that is included in that Department of State guidance document is the Town of New Paltz Wetland and Watercourse Protection Law. I happen to live in the Town of New Paltz and I'm pretty familiar with this law now. I serve as a volunteer on the environmental board. This law was originally passed back in 2005 and it was struck down on a procedural issue. And then a new law was passed, I think in 2011. It was challenged in court and ultimately it was upheld on an appeal. I'll mention a little bit more about that further, but it's important for that reason. And it's quite a comprehensive law. It applies to all water courses, including seasonal or intermittent streams that convey water for at least 3 months out of the year. And there are different buffer widths applied depending on the stream. The Wallkill River gets a wider buffer. Intermittent streams get 50 feet. And we do hire a wetland inspector who makes jurisdictional determinations about whether a watercourse is in fact regulated under this law. And as I'm speaking, I'm realizing I think Mark Jaffe is on this training and he used to serve in our work in our building department, so he's probably even more familiar with this law than I am. So the law, this is just an example of the types of activities that this law regulates, and I won't do this for every example I'm going through, but it will regulate the any new construction of structures in stream buffer areas, mining and excavation, dumping, filling, any alteration to the stream, substance storage, draining, ditching, etc. These, it's a pretty wide ranging list here, but narrower in some respects than some of the other laws that I've looked at. So as I mentioned, the law was challenged in court, and one of the main arguments behind the challenge was that this law was unconstitutional because it was there was no official map of the regulated areas, that it was based on a definition of streams rather than on an official map, and thus that people couldn't be sure of whether they had a regulated feature on their property. But in the court decision, the judges decided that the description in the law was clear enough for a person of ordinary intelligence to understand what a stream was that was protected. And in addition, the law includes an allowance for a one-time free inspection by the wetland inspector. So anybody in the town of New Paltz who wants to know whether they have a regulated wetland or water body or water course on their property can have the wetland inspector come out and look at the property and tell them. So that is built in. Of course, that's an additional cost to the community, but I think it's been a rather modest cost that has helped to implement this law. Another approach is supplemental zoning standards, and these are standards that can apply to lands that have particular environmental constraints and apply across different zones in the community. It can be applied kind of narrowly in the sense of, establishing stream setbacks or removing the watercourse buffer areas from density calculations in subdivisions, or supplemental zoning standards can be written more broadly and apply similarly to the law I just described from New Paltz to a wide range of situations, including those that don't otherwise require permits or approvals. The town of Woodstock has a wetland and watercourse protection standards part of their code that is an example of the latter. It's a fairly broad piece of legislation that applies to activities in and adjacent to all watercourses in the town, including seasonal or intermittent streams, as long as there's a defined channel. And this law has variable width buffers depending on the size of the drainage area going into that stream and the slope adjacent to that stream. So they did an analysis to come up with those widths, and they vary between 30 and 100 feet. And similarly to New Paltz, they have a wetlands inspector who makes jurisdictional determinations. In Coxsackie, they have a set of natural resource protection standards that includes regulation of small streams, in addition to a couple of other different types of environmental resources. So these apply to seasonal or intermittent streams. The standards are based primarily on the USGS stream map, and there are different widths of buffers that are regulated depending on the type of stream. If the stream is not on the USGS map, then it should get a 25-foot buffer. And these standards apply primarily to larger projects that require planning board approval, but they do apply to some types of land management activities. For example, they apply to the clearing of vegetation within buffer areas. You're not supposed to establish new lawns in those buffers. If you do have a lawn in a buffer area, you're only supposed to mow it once a year after August 15th. You're not supposed to store snow in a buffer area, etc. So these are kind of broader regulations of activities within the stream buffer that are, very good from a stream health perspective, I would say. But it does again bring up the question of enforcement, especially in small communities, which may not have a capacity to really be policing whether people are mowing their lawn in the buffer area. So I don't want to discourage people from trying to go down a route like this, but like I said, I think when you're talking about developing regulations that apply more broadly to activities on private land that aren't going through some kind of permitting process, then it requires a much greater effort to educate the public and build support and kind of create a culture of acceptance and awareness that around these regulations. Some of the laws have built-in permit issuance standards. For example, the New Paltz and Woodstock regulations have criteria for the development of a conservation or mitigation plan in circumstances where there's an unavoidable impact to the wetland or watercourse. Some of them also specify that best management practices must be adhered to for forestry or stream crossings. For example, there's a wetland and watercourse law in the town of Ossining in Westchester County that was recently updated to include the specification that any new culverts that are installed in the town must follow DEC's best practices for open-bottomed aquatic passage. Some of these laws also include a section related to monitoring of the project and kind of post-construction monitoring. Another approach is the development of overlay districts, which add standards to the base use and area requirements of the underlying zoning. And this is a type of practice that's commonly used for other types of environmental resource protection in zoning. In this case, the regulations apply only to the areas that are within the designated district, which is often based on an official zoning map. Sometimes it can be based on another official map, like the New York State Classified Stream Map, or could be based on the USGS Stream Map. And in other cases, these areas are delineated around a particularly high quality or sensitive stream or other resource in the community, and they'll only apply to that area. For example, an area that's important to drinking water protection. These can be used in a variety of ways to apply additional regulation, for example, applying buffer protections, increasing the open space requirements in subdivisions, reducing the allowance for impervious surface coverage, or requiring clustering, or otherwise restricting uses. One example is from the town of Wallkill, which has a Shawangunk corridor preservation overlay district. This applies only to the corridor along the Shawangunk, which I think is a designated wild and scenic river. This corridor is shown on the official town zoning map. And the buffers that are protected vary depending on the zoning district. So there are narrower buffers in residential areas, although that depends on the floodplain width, and wider buffers in commercial and industrial areas. It is a fairly restrictive overlay district with most development is prohibited in these areas with the exception of more passive uses like recreation or kind of maintenance of existing landscaping and things like that. And there is some allowance for development of water dependent uses through a special permit process. A very new example is the Village of Woodbury's Water Quality Protection Overlay District, which I think was just passed in the last week or two. And Woodbury is, of course, down in Orange County, and they established this district really to help protect their drinking water supply, which comes from a set of municipal wells that are drilled into a kind of a riparian area along the Woodbury Creek, where there's a large unconsolidated aquifer. And so out of concern for both the quality of the water and the quantity of water continuing to be available to the community, they set up this district that's based on the official map shown here. The new regulations prohibit the clearing of vegetation or any type of disturbance within a 50-foot buffer along the mapped streams. And this includes even the application of pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizer in those areas. So it's kind of a tiered approach where they have more restricted regulations along the 50-foot buffer, and then going out to 100-foot buffer, kind of in the 50 to 100-foot range. Any new development goes through a special permit process and requires site plan approval. Another approach is simple setbacks, and these are standard setbacks of a specified width from the edge of a stream. So you can see in this diagram here, it could be a 100-foot building setback from a stream. Typically, these are for buildings, parking areas, or septic systems, for example. And I want to draw the distinction between buffer protection and setbacks, because a setback alone is not necessarily going to protect the vegetation in a buffer area. It simply means that the building can be no more than or no less than 100 feet from the edge of the stream, for example. But it doesn't tell you what you can do otherwise, in terms of clearing the vegetation. An example we cited in the Department of State guidance is from the town of Ulysses out in Tompkins County in the Finger Lakes region. And their setbacks apply to watercourses that flow for at least 6 months out of the year. They have different widths of buffers, or setbacks rather, that apply in residential versus business or industrial zones. But in addition to the setbacks, they do include regulated buffer areas where vegetation clearing is prohibited. And that's under the design standards in the zoning. And so those are 25 feet for intermittent streams and 50 feet for perennial streams. And these regulations only apply to projects that require building permits or planning board approval. There are other ways to incorporate some of these protections directly into subdivision regulations. For example, requiring an environmental resource analysis at an early stage of the review process to identify, among other resources, the small streams that could be present on the property or nearby. The regulations can require stream setbacks, and they can also require that the stream buffer area be removed from density calculations. Lastly, it's just important to note that it's a good idea to try to integrate the watercourse protection goals throughout the zoning ordinance and include it in the purpose statement of these different sections for the zoning, site plan, and subdivision statutes, along with consideration of stream protection in the decision-making process that's outlined in these different parts of the code. And in addition, to think about how to integrate this with the standard or routine permitting that goes on through the building department to ensure that they're also looking out for small unmapped streams that could be impacted. And this is an example. I mean, this particular picture I think is showing kind of a rural road where they did some, like they cleared out ditches and then they ended up just kind of dumping the fill into, you know, along the side of the road, which happened to be into a wetland with a small stream running through it. There are other ways to regulate clearing and grading activities in the local code as well through clearing and grading control statutes. And that can also be something worth looking into since those activities tend to have impacts on streams and other water bodies. So this is a link to the Department of State local laws, and we'll put that in the chat box. If you're thinking about how to move forward with developing local regulations, the Hudson River Valley Greenway Grants Program is a good source of funding for smaller projects like these. They have grants for up to $10,000. Unfortunately, they are not issuing grants at this time because of the state budget situation. But another source of possible assistance might be to reach out to some of the law schools in our region. Sometimes students are looking for projects to help out with, and they could at least perhaps get started on drafting something that would then move things further along before the local attorney needs to take over and do the final review. So some other ideas for first steps would be to, again, go back to your existing comp plan and zoning ordinance and see what's already mentioned about streams and water protection and what regulations you already have in place. If you don't already do so, if you're not involved in the, if you're involved in the environmental review process, try to recommend stream protection routinely during the reviews. You can look into these different examples of local laws further and see what makes sense for your community. Begin educating local officials and the public and try to find people who would support this and be willing to work on it with you. And also think about building support among other diverse stakeholders who can get on board with it. And just realize it takes time. Most of these laws, I think they take somewhere on range of 2 to 5 years to develop. It's not a quick process. So that's the end of my summary. We can take more questions later on.
Sounds good. So I guess we're going to be passing it on over to Emily Vale. She's going to be talking about managing headwater streams in urban settings and the fun process of naming streams.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 3. I'm back. As Nate said, I'll be talking about small urban streams and stream names. Small urban streams are some of my favorites, so I could easily talk for a very long time about this, but I'm going to keep it very tight. So we'll talk about where urban small streams are, how these streams have shifted from being thought of as a natural resource more to being more thought of as infrastructure. We'll talk about how to name a stream. I'll give a couple of details about Kingston's process and some of my work on the Tannery Brook, and then some thoughts for what's next. So where are small urban streams? They are everywhere. Small urban streams are as prevalent as small rural streams, but we often can't see them. So this was a study done in the Baltimore region, greater Baltimore area. Elmore and Caushel found that 73% of headwater streams were buried in the city of Baltimore. So it's not that those streams aren't there. It's not that they built that city because there were no running water. It's that over the course of the development of our urban areas, small streams have frequently been moved, buried, and altered to make way for different forms of development. Frequently, as streams are buried, they are joined into the storm sewer or the combined sewer system. So this big valley is actually in the city of Albany. This is where the Beaver Creek used to flow, and the Beaver Creek is now part of Albany's largest combined sewer, so it releasing the most raw sewage into the Hudson River in the Albany area. So, you know, this was designed in many ways, and streams now are frequently dealt with in urban areas as infrastructure. So because these issues might come about as stormwater issues, wastewater infrastructure, frequently they are, you know, more dealt with by municipal engineering department, DPW, than perhaps some of the more natural resource or conservation oriented folks. So one of the big differences with these small urban streams in general is that they have a decreased connection with the soil, the riparian area, and the floodplain. And we talked on the first day about how important that is for water quality, for reducing flooding. You can see in this picture in Kingston, this is the Tannery Brook. There was a building built right next to it. On one side, there's access to floodplain, but on the other side, it's a building. You know, it's really disconnected from where it might want to go in higher flow situations. And so while we have this decreased connection with the soil, the floodplain, we have an increased connection with impervious surfaces and urban runoff. And we also talked about this a little bit the first day. There was a question that came in, you know, what about drainage projects that bypass the riparian areas? And this is basically what's happening for urban streams. Do I have this? Not yet. Okay. So we have storm sewers that take runoff from paved surfaces and bring it directly to these urban streams, bypassing any role that a stream buffer might be playing. So many of our streams have been buried, and daylighting is an important restoration option to consider. Nate talked about the Sawmill River in Yonkers, which is a very large river, a huge undertaking to restore that river. But there have been other smaller examples of stream daylighting too. This picture shows a small unnamed stream in the village of New Paltz in the Peace Park that was daylit. So the word daylighting refers to the process of restoring a stream that has been buried and allowing it to see the light of day. And what they found in New Paltz was that it was cheaper to daylight the stream than to repair the sewer infrastructure. So this stream had been buried underneath the sidewalk in a pipe that was leaking and in disrepair. And so something had to be done. And they actually found that daylighting the stream was cheaper than putting it back in the pipe. And obviously there are numerous other benefits to that as well. There's another example of a stream daylighting project that's going on in the village of Ravenna in Albany County. They received a grant through the Green Innovation Grant Program, and they're having this small unnamed tributary to the Hannacroy Creek. Here's what it looks like. You can see it's in this culvert, in this storm drain. It's going underneath the parking lot, which wasn't really used. And so they're transforming a portion of this municipal parking lot into a park with bioretention and green infrastructure practices. And so I think that when we think about stream daylighting, sometimes we think about some of these larger, really impressive, amazing projects, and they might actually be manageable in our communities. And I think if we look around, even if you're not in a bigger city, if you're in a hamlet or a village, there probably are also opportunities to improve your more urban streams. So urban streams come with a set of water quality and quantity challenges. And again, we really need to look to the sewer shed to understand what's going on. So not only the delineation, the watershed delineation, looking at topography, but also the sewer shed. Where are the storm drains connected? How is the water actually flowing from these paved surfaces into our small streams? Because again, so frequently they are the low-lying area. It's very easy to direct drainage towards them. And so they're often the recipients of substantial volumes of polluted runoff. So we can look into the sewer shed to identify opportunities like green infrastructure to filter runoff before it reaches the stream. And in some ways, you know, because we don't have that riparian buffer acting as a buffer between the runoff and the stream itself, we can think about green infrastructure and these practices throughout the sewer shed as having the functional role of a riparian buffer, of a stream buffer, but it's distributed throughout the landscape because of the unique way that stormwater flows. So green infrastructure practices might include things like rain gardens, bioswales, pervious pavement, but also street trees and open space can really be helpful in managing our urban streams. So now I'll switch gears and talk a little bit about naming streams. Naming streams give something value. And there's a wonderful article in the New York Times by Akiko Bush, and she says, giving something a name is the first step in taking care of it. This person's joy is genuine as she found the stream that is in her backyard. It's really amazing to find your small streams, you know, mapped, named, and cared for. So the process of naming a stream is actually a U.S. Geological Survey process. I've included a number of links throughout this presentation, so when you get the PDF, you can go right to their webpage. And there's a process where you submit information to the New York State Committee on Geographic Names, which is part of the State Education Department, and they approve it. There's sort of a process, forms to fill out, and then it goes to the federal USGS to be an official stream name. This particular map shows the Kidney Creek, which is in the city of Poughkeepsie, buried in Poughkeepsie, and very close to where the Mid-Hudson Regional Hospital is, and I would love to bring the Kidney Creek name back because of its wonderful location. So some of the criteria in naming a stream officially includes whether or not there's an existing name, what the historical origin of that name is, if there's justification for the proposed name, if the name is in local usage, and if local leaders, residents, and businesses support the proposed name. There are also, you know, as part of this process, you might also find names of streams that are offensive or inappropriate based on some historical naming of those streams. And this is also a process that can be used to rename streams if that's an issue in your towns as well. So there are lots of places to go to find stream names if there's a small stream and you're not sure if it had a historic name. The Library of Congress has an excellent online repository of historic maps. Historical societies and archives locally can be a great help. They certainly were for me in my Tannery Brook work. And I think it's really important to look at opportunities not only to protect small streams, but also ways that we can restore small streams. And looking to the watershed or the sewer shed to restore those functions of urban and suburban small streams through practices like green infrastructure and preserving open space. And naming a stream, again, can really help the community value it. And there's other ways to do that as well, but I think this can be a helpful process to get people on board and thinking about their local water resources. So this picture is from a project that I did in Kingston called Tracing the Tannery Brook. The Tannery Brook is a headwater stream that flows through Kingston. This is the one of the buried portions of it underneath this parking lot. And we had people come out and literally trace the Tannery Brook and draw things that belong in a healthy stream. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Kingston's open space plan, actually, which Nate started off today's session with. Just bringing it all back around. And so this is the vision map for that open space planning process. And I wanted to call your attention to this particular section. So if we zoom in on that, we see there's the Tannery Brook. I think you can see my cursor here. Here's the Main Street Brook, and here's the Twelfthskill, and they're all named. and they're all mapped in the open space plan with a goal of restoring 2,500 linear feet of stream corridor. And I think this is really significant. So I wanted to mention a little bit about the process of how this came to be, because as Nate said, this was not overnight that all of a sudden we have these small stream restoration goals in our urban areas. So in 2009 and 2014, Hudsonia created significant habitat maps, first along the Esopus Creek corridor and then throughout the rest of the city of Kingston. Thank you, Gretchen. And Ingrid, I think. In 2014, the Hudson River Estuary Program, Laura Heedy, followed up with a habitat survey summary, which included all of that significant habitat work and included more natural resource information in a very easy to use format. In 2018, John Mickelson, on the call, created the Natural Resource Inventory for the City of Kingston, which compiled really detailed information. I was able to provide some information on our small streams, including the Tannery Brook and the Main Street Brook for that process. In 2018, I did the picture that you saw before, the installation of the Tannery Brook in the parking lot, along with a gallery exhibit on the Tannery Brook and its very rich history. In 2019, there was an open space planning process. And on Tuesday at the Common Council meeting, the City of Kingston adopted the open space plan to be formally a part of the comprehensive plan, or Kingston 2025. So that now the goals set in the open space plan are considered part of the guidance around the comprehensive plan, which is a really powerful tool. So I just wanted to break that down, that process, because it's very timely. This just happened on Tuesday, but also relates back to the importance of mapping these small streams and really understanding where they are and having them have names as well. So one last bit from me is that as a follow-up, the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, in partnership with the Hudson River Estuary Program, will be holding a webinar series on stream and buffer protection on Wednesday afternoons in September from 1 to 2 p.m. We've got a whole great slew of content really focusing on buffer protection in particular, and not necessarily just for small streams, but for streams of all sizes. And if you are interested in signing up for that, you can go to our website. These will all be Zoom webinars. And that's it from me.
So I just wanted to give a quick recap of what we've covered in the last 3 days. We started by exploring definitions of streams and headwater streams and the ecological and jurisdictional implications of those definitions. The U.S. Geological Survey, just to remind you, defines a headwater stream as one with an average flow of 5 cubic feet per second or less. We also talked about the basic problems for headwater streams, that many do not appear on public maps. They're unnamed and unrecognized, and many are unprotected by existing laws. And many are also often abused by our treatment of the streams themselves or our land uses nearby. This is despite their great importance as a water resource for larger streams, as well as for lakes, ponds, and wetlands, and reservoirs, and as a source of groundwater replenishment, and as habitat for aquatic and terrestrial animals, mollusks, insects, crustaceans, frogs, salamanders, turtles, and even small streams are used by fish for spawning and nursery habitat, and for refuge for fish from predators that inhabit the larger streams. Headwater streams are also used by beaver and a large array of terrestrial animals for hunting and rehydration, and as cool, moist migration corridors, and even for nesting by songbirds, which, like the Louisiana water thrush, which nests on the ground on or near the stream bank itself. We mentioned a few ways that headwater streams are especially important in this era as the effects of global warming become more acute. Headwater streams, and especially spring-fed streams, provide cool refuge for both aquatic and terrestrial animals and plants. They serve as valuable roles in recharging groundwater, which may be depleted by the expected very prolonged droughts in the region. The streams can also replenish downstream populations of invertebrates and fishes and other animals that have been devastated by large runoff events. Beth discussed the importance of riparian buffers, both for the water quality and habitat quality of headwaters streams, and the characteristics of buffer zones that are most helpful to the stream. Nate mentioned some of the threats to headwater streams, such as pollution, diversion, ditching, hardening of channels, nearby land uses, stormwater, and the problems posed by dams and culverts to the stream ecology and to human infrastructure. We provided a very broad outline of existing state and federal regulatory protections for streams and the limited or absence of protections for many headwater streams. We demonstrated and gave you some practice at finding unmapped streams by remote analysis of topographic maps and aerial photos. This is a skill that can be applied to environmental reviews of development projects, to design conservation easements, and to land use planning of all kinds. So we hope you will use it soon, so you don't lose the technique. We provided some, well, actually before that, yeah, Ingrid showed you many online resources for maps for identifying streams. If you bookmark the ones that you find most useful, you'll always have them at your fingertips. But remember to do your own map analysis to find all the streams that do not show up on those online maps. We gave some ideas for addressing stream issues in environmental reviews. That's both streams that are or are not protected by local or state or federal laws. And we referred you to a site assessment checklist and a seeker fact sheet to assist you with those reviews. And those are both available in the box folder that Ingrid has referred you to. We took you on a virtual field trip to the Millbrook Preserve to see some of the streams that you had predicted from the topographic map of the preserve, and to mention some of the ecological aspects of those streams. Emily described some of the special challenges for maintaining the integrity of streams in urban settings. And she also described some of the procedures for naming unnamed streams, which is not a simple process, but it would spur some fun historical research. And seems like a good way, really a very good way to raise community awareness and appreciation for small streams. Instructions for naming unnamed streams are in the box folder that you'll have access to. Nate and Ingrid talked about incorporating protections for headwater streams into comprehensive plans, open space plans, and zoning ordinances. And we all now, all of you have discussed some of the local protections and lack of protections in your communities. And finally, we asked you to think about more opportunities in your community to advance headwater stream conservation. So we've covered a lot and have tried to convey information and ideas that can be put to use immediately by you in your public roles and your private professional roles dealing with land uses and conservation of natural resources. We will stick around on Zoom for the next half hour or so to discuss lingering questions or additional ideas about any of these topics. And do remember to go to the box folder to find most of the resources that we've referred to throughout this program, including literature and fact sheets and instructions and a list of helpful links and PDFs of our slide presentation. We will very much appreciate your completing an evaluation of this webinar series. It will help us understand the parts of the series that were most valuable to you and the parts that were least so. what problems were posed by the technology, and we know there are some, and what we might do to improve the program in the future. A link to the Survey Monkey evaluation form is in the chat box. Is that right, Ingrid?
Yes, it is.
We want to thank you very much for being with us for these 1, 2, or 3 days, however many you were able to attend, and we're sorry of all the problems caused by the storm. We have enjoyed our conversations with you and learning about your own situations and your own ideas for your communities. We hope you found the webinar worthwhile, and please do stick around as we can talk some more over the next half hour or so.